Hello and welcome to Module 1, Purchasing Clean Vehicles. So we're going to talk about the motivations for clean vehicle procurement. Why do you want to do that? What's in it for the local authority? What's in it for the national governments? What's in it for the members of the public? So, first of all, the big one, air quality. This is top of a lot of news items, particularly around big cities, also national governments facing fines from the EU. But what is poor air quality? How do you define poor air quality? Now, the main things that people are talking about are PM10, NO2, and some people talk about NOx, NOx, and then PM2.5. So, PM10, that is particulate matter that is less than 10 micrograms, so much smaller than the width of your hair, for example, human hair. And this is an issue because it gets into the lungs and causes health issues that we'll cover in a moment. Now, NO2 is a gas and nitrogen dioxide. Now, this is produced in the engine of vehicles, but people also refer to NOx because depending on how much sunlight there is and the ozone concentrations in an area, at the end of the tailpipe, you'll sometimes get NO and NO2. So to make sure you're capturing both, you talk about NOx, NOx. However, NO2 is the pollutant that is harmful to human health. So it's a thing that cities are generally monitored on, is NO2, but it is referred to as NOx as well to capture the NO in the reporting. So the final one then is PM2.5, which isn't talked about as much at the moment as other sources of pollution, but is very important, or other pollutants. It's very important though. So in the same way that PM10 is less than 10 micrograms, PM2.5 is less than 2.5 micrograms. And it gets that much deeper into your lungs. It should be noted that PM2.5 falls under PM10. So in the monitoring of PM10, you're also capturing all of the PM2.5. So PM2.5 is an extra layer of granularity on top of the PM10 calculation reporting. This is something that you're going to see more and more of in the coming years, but at the moment isn't talked about quite as much as particularly NO2 at the moment, but PM10 as well. So the health impacts. So obviously premature death. There was a calculation done a few years ago now in London that said that over 4,000 people a year die prematurely due to poor air quality. But not only are people dying early because of it. There's ongoing, during your life, you have ongoing issues with your health. People have had ongoing issues with their health due to poor air quality. So asthma is the obvious one that people talk about a lot, but there's other respiratory illnesses, various types of cancer that are impacted through breathing air that has poor quality. Also cardiovascular illnesses, particularly around PM10. So generally you want to reduce this because, as you can see by this graphic here, the impact on the economy is vast, and transport is a big reason for. So 60% of the NOx in the UK's air quality hotspots comes from traffic. That is quite a broad brush approach, but the reality is traffic. People walk next to traffic on sidewalks, and people cycle next to traffic. People are traffic, so within their cars. People are breathing in this poor air quality that they themselves are contributing to. So reducing it is an important thing for the health impacts. Now, how is it that we know what the air quality is? What is the mechanisms used by national governments and local authorities and cities in monitoring poor air quality? So this is what a monitoring station looks like. As you can see, it's essentially a box behind a fence. There are other types of methods of monitoring poor air quality, for example diffusion tubes, but this is the top end. There'll be a number of these in most major cities and towns in the UK. I'm going to draw on the example of London because London has got a very good monitoring network. So I'm going to go through the examples of how London monitors its network of monitoring stations. But most cities will have some form of monitoring, and most countries will also have some form of poor air quality monitoring. So first of all, PM10. Now there are two metrics for reporting on PM10. One is the annual mean. So what is the average, the mean concentration of PM10 over the year? As you can see in London, there are very few places that go over the level for PM on the annual mean. Only one location, and that is fairly true throughout Europe. PM10 isn't that big an issue. There's also the daily mean, which looks at how much PM there is over the day, and if 35 days in the year breach the daily mean, then that location has failed and has poor air quality. So as you can see in London, the X's, the red dots, there are 7 of those. This is a few years ago now, but also there's quite a lot that are very close to that limit of 35 days. So the orange ones. But again, I'll show you in a sec. The NO2 monitoring stations, but it's not terrible. We're PM10 is less of an issue now. Now, the NO2, again, so there's an annual mean in the same way there is an annual mean for PM10. And as you can see in London, many areas breach the annual mean. There's also an hourly mean. So in the same way PM10 had a daily mean, there's an hourly mean for NO2. And you can also see that many areas in London breach the hourly mean. You only need to breach the hourly mean 18 times, and then you're deemed to be failing the measurement. Now, the reason for that is because if you breach it 18 times over the year, then that is a strong indication that you have poor air quality and you have too much NO2 in the atmosphere in that particular area. So yeah, London, as has most European cities, and globally most cities have a problem with NO2. And procuring clean vehicles is a very important step in dealing with the NO2 and the PM10 issues that you find in cities. As you can see here, a lot of the poor air quality, particularly in urban areas, particularly around the hotspots, is due to road traffic. So anything that can be done to deal with that should be done to deal with that. Now, there are a number of sources of air quality, not just transport, not just from the tailpipe. You also have Saharan dust, particularly the PM10. Lots of industry. So if your city or if your municipality has a lot of industry, that may be responsible for quite a lot of the poor air quality. Not only from the tailpipe in a car do you get the pollutants, you can also have it from brake and tyre wear, again generally from the PM10 side. Construction can be a big source, particularly if so there's construction itself, and then in addition to the construction, you've got the extra traffic generated by the construction, and then the wheels and those maybe not being held. If it's aggregate coming in, potentially that can impact the air quality. So, do any of you know whether or not your city exceeds local air quality targets, or do you not? I mean, I think it's quite unlikely that you don't, but it may be the case. So, what's being done? We'll talk about it a lot more, what can be done, what you can do, but what is being done at present by the European Commission, by vehicle manufacturers, to deal with this problem. So they are the Euro standards, which are entirely designed to deal with poor air quality as they stand now. So with Euro 6, so if it's a heavy vehicle, Roman numerals are used to describe the Euro standard. So that is Euro 6. And as you can see by this graph here, Euro 1 is the whole area. So limit for PM was 0.16, and limit for NOx was 0.9. And that is right down. So now if you look at Euro 6 down here, it's negligible really. So all new vehicles, if you're going to buy a new vehicle, except for some exceptions, people that produce very small numbers of vehicles, like bus manufacturers, you all have to comply with Euro 6. Now, light-duty vehicles, as of the time that you'll be listening to this presentation, almost all light-duty vehicles have to be Euro 6 now. Again, it's you wouldn't be able to buy a light-duty vehicle unless you're buying Euro 6 light-duty vehicle. So these regulations have been coming in steadily over the years, and so Euro 1 was in '92, and they've steadily got better and better, and it's an amazing compliment or an amazing achievement by the European auto industry to make it to Euro 6. It was very ambitious, but they have made it, and they're actually showing quite good results. There are some issues around the testing cycle, which mean that the Euro standards, the way the test is undertaken on the vehicles, means the Euro standards aren't always a fair reflection on how the vehicle actually performs in real world driving. Particularly if you're doing a lot of city centre driving, a lot of stop-start, the engine never gets warm. If you're driving in those conditions, sometimes the vehicle might not meet quite what the Euro standards aim or state they will meet. So the obvious answer in there is to not use a IC, an internal combustion engine vehicle at all, because an electric vehicle or hydrogen vehicle doesn't have any tailpipe emissions in the first place. So there are also global air pollutants. So we're talking about essentially CO2 or CO2 equivalents here. So transport contributes to somewhere in the region of 22% of the global CO2 that is emitted. Now, there are, the focus of this directive and the focus of this piece of work isn't really on the CO2 equivalent CO2. It's all around air quality and efficiency. But it's still worth noting that by using alternative fuel vehicles, by using very efficient vehicles, CO2 is greatly reduced. And there are EU targets that you can look up. There's IPCC, which is a fantastic resource to talk about global air pollutants. There's the Paris Accords, where different nations are putting forward their plans for reducing CO2. And in almost all of those plans, there'll be something that is relating to transport and how transport can contribute to that reduction. For example, within the EU, there's 20-20-20, so 20% reduction by 2020. Most nation states have got some kind of, some of them very ambitious targets to do with CO2 emission reductions, and there always will be a transport element to that. But fundamentally, CO2 is almost always, or CO2 equivalent, is almost always a product of the burning of fossil fuels. So anything that can be done by you to reduce the burning of fossil fuels is a benefit for global air pollution. So the impact on climate change there. So, as we've already said throughout this presentation, why would you want to burn less? What is the motivation behind it? So, the burning thing contributes to climate change. So avoid doing that. Also, particularly in urban areas, contributes to poor air quality. On top of that, the EU recognise that a lot of fossil fuels come from unstable parts of the world, and there's different figures that are banded around, but billions of dollars are spent every year on importing fossil fuels from these parts of the world that are unstable. So there's billions of dollars that aren't being spent in Europe and aren't improving the economy of the EU. So the more we can do to go away from those sources of energy, the better. Renewables and nuclear and potentially locally sourced gas, these are better options than importing gas from other parts of the world sometimes. So the other point to make is, as I'm sure you've seen in the last few months, the global price of oil has gone down dramatically, but it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in the coming years. So if you're buying, say, a bus to run a route for the next 10 years, you have no knowledge. Well, you have some idea of how much that bus is going to run, how much it's going to cost to run that bus, but it just takes a change in oil price by a few euros, and then suddenly the cost of running that bus over 10 years increases dramatically. 50% of the cost of running a bus is the staff member, maybe 20% is the bus, and the rest of it is the fuel to run that bus. So globally, the EU wants to show leadership in moving away from fossil fuels. It's an ambition, as one of the more developed parts of the world, that we should have and we do have. And so I think that is maybe the final point on this. What the motivation behind moving away from your fossil fueled engines. I think we've covered that quite well here. Thank you.